Here is the most profound mystery in all of science. You are reading these words, and somewhere in your skull, neurons are firing in complex patterns. How does the firing of neurons become the experience of understanding? How does electrochemical activity become the feeling of curiosity, or grief, or the particular quality of red? This is the mind-body problem, and it has resisted every attempt at a clean solution for over 3 centuries. William James wrestled with it more honestly, and more productively, than almost any thinker before or since. James came to the mind-body problem not as a professional philosopher but as a trained physiologist who had also lived intensely inside his own consciousness. He knew both sides of the equation from the inside. He had studied the brain with the methods of science and had navigated the turbulent inner world of emotion, will, and religious experience with the tools of introspection. He was uniquely positioned to see why the easy answers on both sides were wrong. The prevailing view in James's time was divided between 2 camps. The materialists held that consciousness was simply what the brain did, a byproduct of neural activity, perhaps even an epiphenomenon with no causal power of its own. The dualists, following Descartes, held that mind and body were genuinely different substances that somehow interacted. James found both positions deeply unsatisfying. The materialists could not explain why physical processes should give rise to experience at all. The dualists could not explain how 2 fundamentally different substances could causally affect each other without violating the laws of physics. In the Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, James staked out what would become the functionalist position. Consciousness, he argued, should be understood not by asking what it is made of but by asking what it does. Consciousness selects. It highlights certain features of the environment and suppresses others. It adapts the organism to novel situations that habit and reflex cannot handle. It is, in his memorable phrase, an organ added for the sake of steering a nervous system grown too complex to regulate itself automatically. This was a genuinely revolutionary move. Instead of trying to reduce mental states to physical states, or to maintain an unbridgeable dualism between them, James proposed that we understand mind in terms of its functional role in the life of the organism. What matters is not what mental states are made of, but what they do. This functionalist framework anticipated by many decades the position that now dominates cognitive science and artificial intelligence research, where mental states are defined by their causal roles in processing information and producing behavior. But James was too honest a thinker to leave it there. As he probed more deeply into the problem, particularly in his later work essays in Radical Empiricism, published posthumously in 1912, he began to doubt that functionalism was the whole story. It explained the utility of consciousness, but it did not explain its existence. Why should any functional process be accompanied by experience? Why should the selection and steering that consciousness performs not simply happen in the dark, without any inner light of awareness? This is what philosopher David Chalmers would later name the hard problem of consciousness, and James felt its force with full seriousness. His response was to question the basic assumption that mind and matter are fundamentally different kinds of thing. In essays in Radical Empiricism, he proposed that both the mental and the physical are aspects of a more fundamental stuff, pure experience, that is neither mental nor physical in itself but takes on one character or the other depending on the relations in which it stands. This position, which he called neutral monism, was an attempt to dissolve the mind-body problem rather than solve it, by showing that the dichotomy on which it rests is itself a philosophical mistake. Modern philosophy of mind has not resolved the debate James entered. The hard problem remains hard. Functionalism is the dominant framework in cognitive science, but critics argue that no functional description can capture the qualitative character of experience, the what it is like of seeing red or feeling pain. Neuroscience has mapped the brain with extraordinary precision without yet explaining why any of it feels like anything at all. What James contributes to this ongoing conversation is a combination of intellectual humility and philosophical courage. He refused to pretend the problem was solved when it was not. He was willing to follow the argument into genuinely uncomfortable territory, including the suggestion that our most basic categories of mind and matter might need wholesale revision. He took experience seriously as data, insisting that any theory of consciousness that cannot account for the richness of inner life has simply not risen to the level of the facts it claims to explain. In an age when artificial intelligence is producing systems that mimic many cognitive functions with impressive fidelity, James's question becomes more pressing than ever. If mind is defined by function, do sufficiently complex AI systems have minds? And if they perform all the relevant cognitive operations, is there something it is like to be them, some inner experience accompanying the computation? James did not live to face these questions in this form, but the framework he developed across the principles of psychology and essays in Radical Empiricism remains one of the most rigorous and honest starting points we have for thinking about them clearly. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his timeless ideas.